In this video, I'm going to show you how to get rid of your monthly API services that you use in all of your automations. We'll build out our own API that we can deploy to our own server on the Google Cloud platform. And if that sounds complicated, stick around because I'm going to show you how to do everything step by step. And best of all of these tools are free and you can use them in your business today. So there's a lot of great tools out there like Leonardo or 11 Labs or JSON to Video or ChatGPT that helps us build out our automations for our projects. This here is an automation that I built for my faceless video generator. But the problem is we end up using these APIs very heavily and it becomes quite costly as we add up all of these different services. Some of these APIs are quite costly and we don't actually use all of their services. We just need one part of it, or their pricing structure just doesn't match how we actually use the automation. In this automation here, we had to do a lot of merging of video and audio in these automations right here. And so it started to become very costly to run this automation at the scale we wanted. So instead, we're going to build our own API with some of these common functions that we need a lot inside. And then we'll deploy that on the Google Cloud platform, which will allow us to run all of these services at a very low cost. And then we can take the other API services that we've purchased that are helping us complete our automations and we can just get rid of them. And over time, as we identify other APIs that we need to replicate, we can isolate those and then also migrate those into our API over time. And not only that, but we can create our own make module. Here you can see I'm working in the No-Code Architects toolkit, and this acts as a wrapper to make working with the API much easier. The same way we use other automations like Leonardo in our make automations. So if we take a look here, we have one module here that will allow us to convert media to MP3. We have another module here that will help us transcribe media. This will replace ChatGPT Whisper, and it will also allow us to process files that are larger than 25 megabytes. And then we also have a function here that will combine videos. And then over time, as we isolate other APIs that we want to replicate and bring into our API, we'll simply target those and develop them and release them as we go. And we already have other functions that we're working on like audio mixing, overlaying audio on video, and also being able to upload large files to Google Drive, which is quite difficult to do inside Make natively. And so you can see here, over time, we can identify additional functions that we need inside of our toolkit to help us reduce the costs in our automations. And we can even work together as a group to identify the different functions that we need to add into our toolkit from our automations to save costs. And then we can expand the toolkit as needed. And if you're wondering how this works, all an API is a server with some code on it that when you send it a request, it does some sort of processing and then sends that request back to you. So what's happening here is there are some developers and companies developing this code and putting it into the API, and then they're charging you a fee to communicate with the API. So we can develop our own API, and then we can simply put in our own code into that API and make it easy for you to deploy it on Google Cloud, and then you can simply call your own API and get that response back instead of having to pay for the custom APIs. Now, this doesn't mean we're going to try to replace every API out there. That's really not practical. But what are those commonly used functions that we use that are very costly? How can we just target those specific things, build them out, and then use them at a lower cost? So in this video, I'm going to show you how to deploy your own API toolkit on the Google Cloud. I'll show you how to use that API in Make, and a cool little Airtable database that shows you how to track all of your requests to your own API and the response from that API. Here we have videos and transcripts and SRT files, all being processed by our own API. And if you want beta access to these Make modules and the base template to this Airtable database, make sure to jump into the No-Code Architects. It's a growing community where you can get answers to all your questions, including a Make automation course and access to a bunch of templates like the video you're seeing today. But everybody in the No-Code Architects will get access to these Make modules and will be able to work with us closely as we work through the beta and we're selecting different features and APIs to replace. Now, one of the first things we need to do before we can call our API with our make.com module or just the typical HTTP module is we need to actually deploy the service. And you can actually get a $300 credit from the Google Cloud platform. Just make sure to check out this link here and start free, and you'll get a free $300 credit that lasts up to 90 days. After you've created that account, you're going to want to go to your Google Cloud. I'm at console.cloud.google.com. It's already pre-selected a project that I have already worked on. If you're here, you're going to want to create a new project. I have to come up here to new project. You'll want to follow the same path. I'm going to go ahead and type NCA for the No-Code Architects Toolkit, and then I'll put demo. and then I'll go ahead and click create. Looks like I can't have in the parentheses, so I'll remove those. Create. Gonna go ahead and start creating that project for me. Once it's ready, I'm gonna go ahead and select that project. Once you created it, you should see your project here under your domain. I can close the notifications. And then the first thing we're gonna do is to come up to the menu here, and we're gonna go to API services. We're gonna go to library. We're gonna type in Google Cloud Storage. We'll hit enter, and then we're gonna go ahead and install the Cloud Storage API. Make sure you're picking the same one that I am here. You want to make sure that that API is enabled. Then we're going to come back and go back to the library again. This time we'll type Google Drive API. We'll hit enter. Then we're going to add the Google Drive API. Go ahead and click enable if it's not already. Now we're going to add one more. We're going to head back to the library and we're going to type Google Run API. We'll hit enter. And here we're going to add the Google Run Admin API. Go ahead and click enable. So there we go. The first part is done. Now we need to go and create a service account. So again, I'm going to come up to the menu. Then I'm going to come down to IM and admin, come over to the sub menu, and I'm going to go to service accounts. Here, I'm going to create a new service account. For the name, I'm going to use NCA Toolkit service account. Then make sure to create and continue. Then we're going to select a role. We're going to type storage admin, grants full control of buckets and objects. And then we're going to add another role. Here we're going to type viewer. We're going to select that role and we'll go ahead and click continue and then we'll click done. So now you have this new user here. You go ahead and click into it. Then we're going to come up to keys and we are going to add a new key. Go ahead and click create new key. And you're going to pick JSON, go ahead and click create. Now notice that it's going to download a file to your downloads directory. Keep in mind that that is there. Notice in my downloads, I have that JSON file here. It downloaded automatically and we'll use it in just a moment. Go ahead and close this here. Now we're going to come back up to the menu and we're going to go to cloud storage and then we're going to go to buckets. We're going to create a new bucket. So now we got to name our bucket. I'll call it the NCA Toolkit bucket. Go ahead and click continue. For now, I'll go ahead and select the defaults multi-region. I'm really going to accept all of these defaults here, and I'm just going to go ahead and create the bucket. So by default, when you create this bucket, and this bucket is where we're going to store files that we create in our API, it will not allow the public to view those files. But indeed, we do need to allow the public to access these files, and you'll see why in a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this off, enforce public access prevention on this bucket. I'm going to go ahead and click confirm. And in order to make things public, we still need to update the permissions a bit. So click on permissions. Then we're going to scroll down here and grant access. For new principals, we're going to type all users. Then we're going to select that here. And then in the roles here, we are going to type storage object viewer. We're going to select this here. We're going to go ahead and click save. And now it's going to warn us that we're making all of our resources public, and we're going to go ahead and say allow public access. And so now that we're seeing that warning here, we are good to go. So now that we have this set up, we're going to head back to our menu here and we're going to come down to Cloud Run. This is where we can actually deploy that server. We're going to come up here to deploy container and we're going to pick a service. Here we're going to leave this pre-selected. For the container image, you can simply copy what I'm pasting right here, letter by letter. Make sure you copy it exactly. Then you're going to pick a service name. I recommend picking the No-Code Architects Toolkit. I'm going to add a -demo because I already have one running with a similar name. It's going to give you this endpoint here, which is going to be the URL of our own internal API. For authentication, we're going to go ahead and click this, allow unauthenticated. For CPU allocation and pricing, we're going to go ahead and click CPU always allocated. For service auto scaling, you can leave that at 0. You can leave this as is on all. Then you're going to want to expand this section here, container volumes, networking, and security. You want to make sure it's on port 880. You can go ahead and leave these blank. For memory, I'm going to go ahead and move it to 4 gigabytes. I'm sure you could use less, but this is where I did all my testing, so I'm going to start there. Over time, I'm sure we can use fewer resources and make it even cheaper. You can leave CPUs at 1. For a maximum concurrent request per instance, we're going to move that to 1. For execution environment, we're going to leave that alone. And for revision auto scaling, you can leave it at 0 to 100. If you want to limit the number of instances that you run at any given time, you can always lower that. Startup CPU boost, you can leave that on. Now, the only thing we need to update now is the variables and secrets. So go ahead and click on that. I'm going to go ahead and add a variable. The first one we'll add is the API key. This is the key you're going to use when you call your own API. I'm going to just go with test 1, 2, 3. And we're going to add another variable here. Here we're going to add the GCP bucket. name. And then here we're going to need to use that bucket name that we created if you don't remember. If you don't remember what that is, just go back to your menu, go to the cloud storage, and just use this bucket name here. You can even just copy and paste it. Put that into the value. We're going to add another variable, storage path. In this case here, we're going to type GCP in uppercase. Then let's go ahead and add another variable. Here we're going to add the GCP SA credentials. And now for the value here, we need to go to the file that we downloaded when we created that service account. So go ahead and open that file. Make sure you're using a text editor, and then you can simply copy that entire section there, come back to the browser and just simply paste that into this value here. And so with that, you should be able to come down and create your instance. It's going to take a couple seconds for that to deploy. And if you're curious, this here is where the actual code for deploying your API is located. It's on a platform called Docker Hub, and this URL points directly at the code to download for you to deploy. And again, what's cool about this is that it's completely free to use this package and deploy it. You just need to pay for your server on Google Cloud. But this will be a lot cheaper than having all of those APIs. The first time you deploy it, it'll take a minute, so just be patient. All right, so now that this is deployed, we can go ahead and test this out. So for testing, I'm going to use this program called Postman. It's a program that I recommend you download so that you can test your API calls. It's a free app that you can get at postman.com. And so all I'm really doing here is simulating what's happening in one of these modules here to our new server. It's really not that complex. I created a new tab, which is going to allow me to create a new request. I'm going to move that request to a post. And now I'm going to come back to Google Cloud, and I'm going to grab this new URL that I added, come back to Postman, and I'm going to type in that URL, and then I'm going to put a slash. The first API call I'm going to test is the transcribe. So I'm going to go ahead and put slash transcribe at the end of this new URL. Then I'm going to come to the headers here, and I'm simply going to type in X API key. And remember, when we set up our environment variables for our new container, for the API key, we use test123. So I'm going to put test 1, 2, 3, just like that. And now I'm going to come to the body section here, and I'm going to move this to raw, and I'm simply going to put in these curly braces here, open curly brace and close curly brace. Now, in order to use this transcribe endpoint, we need to pass it a media URL. So you'll want to use media_URL with a colon. And I've got a bunch of Google Drive links that I've been using as a test. So this is a link to a public file on the internet that can be downloaded. So you got to make sure it's public. And it's just a video that I can send to the API to have it transcribed. So I'll add a quote, then I'm going to add in the URL just like that. Then I'm going to put a comma. And then we have to select what the output should be, because we can do transcriptions or SRT files. So I'm going to put output transcript, just like that. And I should be able to now run this API call. I'm going to go ahead and click send. That's going to take a second to run, but it is now calling this container that we built previously. And there we have our output. So we have message equals success, and we can see the response, which is the transcript from the video that I sent it. Now, again, remember, this is a Google Drive file that I made sure was shareable on the internet. So you have to change the permissions on that video file. Also, for testing, make sure you use a small video file, not a large one. Large files will cause an issue. Anything over 100 megabytes is going to cause an issue for your testing. So make sure it's 25 megabytes or lower, just to make sure that this process happens quickly and your testing isn't overly complicated with large video files. So we got that working. I want to test one other API call, which actually generates a file. This one only generates text. So now what I'm going to do is modify this request to media to MP3. And what this one does is it actually takes media or a video file and it converts it into an MP3. And so this one actually has to generate that MP3 and save it to the Google Cloud storage. If you remember, when we set all of this up, we created a Google Cloud storage bucket. And so when we create that MP3, it's going to be created here. And then the API needs to send it back to us so we can actually access it. So here I just changed the endpoint to media to MP3, and then I can erase the output transcript because we're not creating a transcript. So now I'll go ahead and run this request on the new endpoint media to MP3 with the video, and we'll see what we get. All right, so here you can see we got a success, and it's also returning a URL that contains the MP3. So if I were to simply cut and paste this URL into my browser here, we're going to see that we now have an MP3 that we can listen to. We've had clients that triple the amount of content they're producing. And that is the same audio that was in this video that we passed it here. So now that we confirmed the transcribe endpoint is working and also the media to MP3 endpoints are working and the API is actually producing the MP3 and sending us back a URL that we can access and download, we can continue on with the rest of the video. All right, so now that we've tested that our API works using the Postman app, how can we actually call our remote API from Make itself? So again, remember I did mention that I have these new make.com modules that you can use, the no-code architects. These are built-in Make modules that you can use and access. Currently, these modules are in beta and are only accessible to members in the no-code architects, but you can still access your own API without these modules. It just takes a little bit more work. So I'll show you how to do that now. And then after that, I'll show you how these modules work in replacement of those. So if you want to make an API call to your own API, just like we did here in Postman, you can use the HTTP module. So I'm going to go ahead and add the HTTP module here, and we are going to make a request. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And now we just simply need to fill in the same information like we did here in Postman. So we have our URL right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab that, and then I'll add that to the URL here. I'm going to change this to a post. In the headers here, I am going to add X API key, and I'm going to type in the key that we used when we launched our instance, test123. For the body type, again, I'm going to go ahead and click on raw. For content type, we will use JSON, application JSON. And for the request content, I'm simply going to go back here to what we used inside of Postman, and I'll copy that here in the request content. And then I'll go ahead and update parse response to yes. I'll click OK. And now if I run this module once, it's going to do the same thing that Postman did. It's going to call this with this media URL, and it should return a response. Here's our response. Here's the data. So we have a success, and now we have that MP3 that we completed as a part of this request. So again, we took this video and converted it into an MP3. And so from this point on, we could add additional modules to do whatever we needed to do with this specific MP3 file. So this HTTP module works just fine, but it's actually quite a bit easier to use this new no-code architects toolkit API using the no-code architects toolkit make modules. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this HTTP module, and I'll show you how these work. So what's nice about the no-code architects toolkit built-in make modules is that it works just like an actual module that you've used before. Plus it has all of the endpoints and the different functions that we use easily accessible. And when you add one and you go into it, it simply gives you a place to put in the different variables that you can send. So far we've only been using the media URL, and I haven't shown you the webhook and this ID yet. I'll show you that in just a second. But before I do that, I also want to show you how you make your own connection. So I'll delete this module, and then I'll create a new one, and then I'm going to add a new connection. So when we do this, what it's going to do is it's going to ask us for the X API key. And again, remember we were using test123, and then it's asking us for our specific toolkit URL. So again, remember we deployed our own server. So I'm back here in the Google console, and here was the server that we launched. And again, remember we have this URL here. So we copy that, we'll come back to make, and we'll add our toolkit right here. And then I'll name it. And then if I click save, then it's going to save that connection for the long term, and then I can continue to use it. So now instead of having to use an HTTP module, I can simply pass in that media URL directly into the module itself. I'll grab that right here. I'll add that to the media URL. I'll go ahead and click OK. And then I'll go ahead and run this module only. So it's only running this module with the new connection. And then we get that output message success with our response, which is the new MP3. Again, we could take this and copy and paste it directly into the browser, and then we could go ahead and play it and listen to it just like we did before.
Amount of content they're producing each day.
And so there you go. There's a test new module. And then we've also got modules here for transcribing media, just like we did over here in Postman. Remember, we transcribed media. So we could do the same thing here. And then we could also combine videos. And again, that will come in handy when we're doing things like faceless videos, where we're generating lots of videos and merging them together with audio. And then again, we're going to create a lot of other endpoints here too, like audio mixing and really anything that we want to develop as a group. Now, I haven't talked about it yet, but there is a really cool feature in the No-Code Architects Toolkit API that is also available in the make.com modules, which is a webhook and ID. So sometimes when you're processing these files, like processing a video to MP3 or combining multiple videos into one, and also trying to transcribe a very large video file. Sometimes these processes can take a long time to process. And in those cases, you can use a webhook so that when the process is finished, it will send you the information to your webhook later, which was the same process I was using in my faceless video generator. So what you can see here is I have a very basic Airtable database that is set up, and we're tracking just a few different fields that come back from the API when we actually call it. So if you want to go ahead and create your own Airtable base, go ahead and replicate this where you have a request ID, you have a text field for an endpoint, you have a text field for the ID, you have a long text field for the response, a text field for the code, a long text field for the message, and then just a created timestamp. And then all I do is I have this automation here, which is turned on and is looking for requests coming into this webhook. So if I did this from scratch, I'll come down here and create a new automation. And then I'm going to see all down here. And then I'm going to look for when webhook received. And then I'm going to copy this webhook into the request we make on the toolkit. So let's just go ahead and create a new one real quick. I'll go ahead and do the media to MP3. And again, you'll create that connection if you haven't already done so. And here I'm going to put the webhook URL. And again, remember we copied that from the new automation we are building here. And then we need that media URL. So I'm going to come back to Postman real quick and grab that URL. And then we'll drop that here in the media URL. And then the final thing that we need to do is we need to add an ID. Anytime we send the webhook URL, we need to pass it an ID that we can reference later. So here I'm just going to do demo 123. I'll go ahead and click OK, and then I will run this module only. And now notice that it didn't try to actually process and return that MP3 right away. It just sent us a message back saying that it is now processing. And now if I jump back over to Airtable, we can see that something sent us a result to our webhook. And if we take a look inside, we're going to see the endpoint that we called, which was media to MP3. This was the ID that we passed at demo 123. And this ID allows us to keep track of all of the different requests that we make to the endpoint and sort them out when the endpoint is actually calling our webhook. And then we have the response, the code, and the message. And so we could simply come here and add a new create record and update the record here in this table. And then we can update the endpoint that came from the webhook, the ID, the response, the code, and the message. So you would just add all these fields like this, and then you would just simply map in the data from the body, endpoint, ID, response, code, and the message. And now if I were to run this just like that, come back to the data, we're going to see in our log for the API that we have the media to MP3. We have the ID that we sent it. Remember, if we come here, we sent demo 123. And so that came back to us here. It actually sent us the URL for our MP3 here. We have the success code and the success message and the timestamp. So then we could come back to make, and let's go ahead and add the other options that we have. I'm going to do the transcribe media. For the media URL, we'll use the same file that we've been using. We'll go ahead and create a transcript. You could also create an SRT file. For the webhook, we'll pass in what we sent the previous one, just like that. And here, let's just put transcript demo. Click OK. We'll go ahead and run this module only. And again, remember, because we're passing the webhook, it says message processing right away. It doesn't actually process it in make. It's going to process it and then send it to our Airtable database where we could then trigger further automations. And then we can go ahead and add in one more endpoint here. The one that we have is combined videos. And here we can add in multiple URLs. So I'll add in one video here, and then I can add in another video, and it's going to merge those two videos into one. And then for the webhook, I'll grab the webhook that we've been using, drop that in here. And then for the ID, I'll type combine videos. I'll click OK. I'll go ahead and run this module once only. Notice it returns right away as well, processing. And then if we come back to our Airtable log, we're going to see we have the transcript coming in. That's the one we did right here with the transcribe. So we can come in and we see the ID that we passed it, and we can also see the transcription of that video with the success codes. And then we just need to wait for the combined videos to run, depending on how large the videos are and how much resources you gave your server when you created it. It'll take a few minutes for sure. Now looking at the log, it looks like there was another transcript that I ran that just came through as well. So now we're just waiting for that combined videos to come through. It takes a bit longer than the others. And there it just popped in. There's the combined videos. So if I take a look at that final file here, we can see it's a 1-minute video, and I happen to know that both clips happen to be 30 seconds. So if I jump over to past 30 seconds, we can see it's a totally different clip that we merged together, two into one. Now, again, I do want to mention that we are not necessarily going to try to replace every single API out there. That would just really be impossible. But we are going to focus in on what are the API functions that we need to run our AI automations and reduce costs. Are there certain functions that we can pull out from APIs that we use a lot and get those into our own API toolkit so we can launch this server and access these make modules and get our work done at a much lower cost. And again, what I think is really great is that as a group, we can isolate the functions that would be the most beneficial to the most people, and we can build those out, release them, and then we can just keep iterating and do more and more. So again, if you want to get early access to the Make.com No-Code Architects toolkit, along with tech support to help you get this up and running in your automations, make sure to jump into the No-Code Architects. In the beginning, I'm going to be focusing on the members in this community to get this launched. But again, you don't have to use these modules. You can always use the HTTP module. Like I showed you earlier in the video, you can deploy everything and use it just like that. And if you want more information on the API toolkit itself, it is on GitHub. You can download it for free there. There are READMEs on how to use it and all the different endpoints that you can call. We're just getting started here. I think this is going to be an amazing tool for the AI automation space. I hope you found this video valuable, and I'll see you on the next one.